Many electric utilities these days seem to have a new preoccupation with the concept of fairness. Utilities throughout the country are emphasizing fairness concerns to advocate for major policy changes that would greatly hinder the growth of the nation's rooftop solar energy industry. For instance, in late 2013, APS, a large investor-owned utility in Arizona, relied heavily on its fairness arguments to secure state regulators' permission to charge monthly fees on all customers in their territory that have solar energy systems. Utilities in Wisconsin and other states have more recently invoked notions of fairness to argue for increases in the fixed charges that appear on utility bills, which has the effect of making solar energy users pay more every single month. And some utilities have argued that fairness requires that they also change or weaken their net metering programs in ways that make them less beneficial to customers with solar panels. Here are a few quotes from the past couple of years just to give you a sense of this trend. First, a salesperson for a utility in Oklahoma declared, quote, "Look, we're not anti-solar or anti-wind or trying to slow this down. We're just trying to keep it fair." When asked why the Arizona utility APS was advocating for large fees on solar energy users, a spokesperson for that utility simply stated, quote, "Look, this is all about fairness." And Salt River Project, or SRP, a different Arizona utility seeking to impose similar fees on rooftop solar energy users, explained that the utility, quote, "just wants to make sure that customers who don't have solar panels, quote, are not unfairly burdened." Now, of course, all of us generally want our policies to be fair. But should we be concerned about utilities' growing use of fairness arguments against policies that favor rooftop solar energy? Interestingly, this topic of fairness has garnered lots of attention in legal academic circles over the past couple of decades. Most notably, in 2001 and 2002, a pair of Harvard law professors named Stephen Chevelle and Louis Kaplow published a book and then also a 300-page long article in the Harvard Law Review that focused on appeals to the notion of fairness used in policy debates. In essence, Chevelle and Kaplow concluded that we should be very, very cautious when using fairness arguments as a basis for policy decisions. To quote their own words, quote, "When a particular result seems fair or unfair to us, what should we do? We should explore the problem both analytically and empirically, and also reflect on our notion of fairness. In some instances, we'll thereby identify important considerations that we might have otherwise omitted from our analysis. At other times, we'll find that our notion of fairness may be misleading. A common phenomenon, they say, is that the notion of fairness reflects one important factor in a situation, but ignores others." Now, Chevelle and Kaplow are very smart guys. So I decided to apply their advice and more carefully analyze the basic fairness arguments against utility policies that favor rooftop solar energy. What I discovered was that utilities' fairness arguments describe at least three very distinct types of impacts within retail electricity markets. In all three cases, these fairness arguments do seem to be misleading and distracting decision makers in harmful ways. Let's examine each one of these three basic impacts that utilities have labeled as unfair. Okay, first, the most common argument that utilities make is that solar-friendly policies allow customers with rooftop solar panels to use the electric grid without having to pay their, quote, fair share of the costs of maintaining it. I like to call this argument the free rider argument. Basically, utilities are arguing that because customers with solar panels buy far less power from the utility has to raise its electricity rates in order to keep its same rate of return. And those higher electricity rates cause customers who don't have solar panels to end up paying more and more for their power. This is basically a claim about what I would call cross-subsidization, a claim that those who do not have solar panels are subsidizing those that do. Now, we should first point out that cross-subsidization among ratepayers in electric utilities is nothing new. It actually occurs all the time. Factors such as the customer's proximity to power plants or substations, or the time of day when a customer consumes the most power, greatly impact the size of a customer's individual cost burden on its utility. But electricity rates typically take into account very few of these factors when setting electricity rates. Usually it's sort of one size fits all within a certain category. So the reality is that it would be prohibitively expensive to completely eliminate cross-subsidization among customers of pricing of electric power. In fact, many utilities actually intentionally create cross-subsidies within their rate structures. For instance, in lots of jurisdictions, there are differences between the per kilowatt hour prices that commercial and industrial ratepayers pay and those that residential ratepayers pay, or differences between high-income ratepayers and low-income ratepayers and what they pay for their power. Now, of course, the utilities and state regulators that have been purposefully facilitating these cross-subsidies for decades rarely express any concerns about their fairness implications. Okay, but still, let's look at this a little bit closer. Just how big are the potential cross-subsidization effects at issue in this context? Well, a report summarizing one of the most rigorous studies on this question done yet was recently released by the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. This report concluded that even if a hypothetical utility in the southwestern United States, satisfied 10% of its total energy demand through net-metered rooftop solar energy systems. Now, that's a level of market penetration of rooftop solar that vastly exceeds the current level in most parts of the United States, certainly in Arizona. That if that were to happen, the utility's electricity rates would still only increase by about 2.5%. And the truth is that in the Southwest, rooftop solar panels tend to produce their most power in the late afternoon on hot summer days, the same exact times that electricity demand is high, and utilities are paying the most through spot markets and other means for their power that they provide to us. In addition, rooftop solar-generated electricity tends to be consumed very close to where it's produced, so it causes comparatively little wear and tear on the electric grid. And then if we were to factor in non-financial factors like the environmental benefits associated with solar energy, as some regulators in Minnesota recently did, the net value to society of rooftop solar-generated electricity becomes even higher. And look, even if it were true that solar energy-friendly policies did result in significant cross-subsidies to rooftop solar users, which honestly seems doubtful in many cases, it's not entirely clear that those subsidies would be a bad thing. Governments have been intentionally subsidizing solar energy for more than a decade, just as they do with oil and gas producers and lots of other parties in the energy industry. You see, subsidies for solar energy, which economists might refer to as Pigouvian subsidies, can be a legitimate means of correcting what economists would call positive externality problems that might otherwise lead to suboptimally low levels of solar energy adoption in the United States. Now, the truth is that utilities have yet to articulate any good reason why the cross-subsidizations that they claim are occurring between utility customers because of rooftop solar energy are any less fair than the cross-subsidizations between taxpayers and solar energy users that have existed for a long time under tax credits, rebates, and other programs that have long supported solar energy. In other words, the cross-subsidization type of unfairness that some utilities seem so concerned about seems far less severe or troubling than these utilities suggest. Okay, now let's turn to a second and closely related fairness argument against solar-friendly policies. This is the argument that they result in wealth transfers from high-income citizens to low-income citizens, and that is unfair. This argument's really about the idea that wealthy residential utility customers are probably more likely to be homeowners with good credit scores, who would be good, viable candidates for new rooftop solar energy systems on their roofs. So is this a valid fairness argument? Well, it certainly does seem true that low-income households are getting rooftop solar panels not nearly as frequently as those of higher socioeconomic status. However, in many states, lower-income households may not be getting solar panels because doing so offers them far less of a financial benefit, since they already qualify for steeply discounted electricity rates. For instance, in the territory of Arizona's APS utility, a family of 5 making roughly $42,000 per year can qualify for income-based monthly electricity rate discounts ranging from 26 to 65%. Now, it would make very little financial sense for customers receiving those sorts of huge discounts to get solar panels. Moreover, in economic circles, the predominant line of reasoning is that it's best not to consider wealth distribution impacts or regressivity at all when making most policy decisions. Instead, economists tend to advocate addressing those wealth distribution issues, which are definitely legitimate issues that we should be concerned about in some contexts, but addressing them solely through the income tax system and direct subsidies to the low-income folks. Again, to quote Harvard law professors Kaplow and Chevelle, quote, "When legal rules do have distributive effects, the effects usually should not be counted as favoring or disfavoring the rules, because distributional objectives can often be best accomplished directly using income tax and transfer programs. One reason that economists have tended to favor these direct means of redistribution is that they reach all individuals and are based explicitly on income." Okay, well, in addition, research shows that low-income individuals are actually also more likely to live near coal-fired power plants or nuclear plants or pipelines, things that carry significant health and safety risks that are associated with conventional electricity production. So policies promoting clean energy may actually make many of these citizens better off in the long run. In short, regressivity-based fairness arguments against solar-friendly utility policies simply don't carry much weight either. All right, now for the third and final major fairness argument that utilities are making against solar energy-friendly policies. This one is the claim that these policies are unfair to utilities themselves. Now, for obvious reasons, utilities don't make this claim very often. But ironically, rooftop solar energy's impacts on utilities and their shareholders are probably driving utilities' campaigns against solar-friendly programs more than anything else. In what sense might solar-friendly utility policies and rate designs arguably be unfair to utilities? Well, it is true that the growth of rooftop solar energy has the potential to significantly cut into utility companies' profits. Electric utilities invest in expensive grid infrastructure on an expectation that state regulators will protect them against competition and also ensure that the utilities eventually recoup all of their investment plus some sort of reasonable return. One could thus argue that a state's support of policies that favor distributed solar energy breaches this sort of implied regulatory compact between utilities and state regulators. However, it's important to remember, when you think about this argument, that state governments have never promised utilities that they would protect them against what we might call disruptive innovations in the electricity industry, such as rooftop solar energy technologies, distributed storage technologies, and other technologies that are allowing for more distributed generation. Moreover, shareholders who purchase shares in utilities have long enjoyed higher returns on investment than they might get in, say, T-bills or low-risk investments, in part because they are assuming additional risks when they purchase those shares, including risks related to disruptive innovation. So it's simply not reasonable for utilities and their shareholders to argue now that policies allowing for the growth of solar energy are unfair to them. Now, to be clear, it is definitely true that there could be some pain for all of us if the transition toward distributed energy generation is not managed effectively. If handled improperly, this transition could theoretically cause some utilities to spiral into insolvency, resulting in intermittent power or lower quality electricity service. However, arguments that frame these very real challenges as being about fairness don't help to address these legitimate concerns. Instead, when utilities use fairness arguments, they're just distracting and misleading in ways that slow our progress in addressing the real challenges that utilities face today. So, what might we take from all of this? Well, quite simply, policymakers and stakeholders should demand that fairness arguments not be made in the debate over utility policies that affect rooftop solar energy. The issues that are at stake in this debate are actually far more complex than mere fairness questions. And as Professors Chevelle and Kaplow predicted, framing these challenges as being about fairness clearly is counterproductive and unjustifiable. Now, digging more deeply into the real conflicts at issue and disregarding fairness arguments is more likely to lead us all to policies that facilitate a smooth, efficient transition toward clean, distributed energy.